All right, well, the second question then on the midterm, the one about Bartkey talking about psychological oppression. Now, certainly there's lots there you could talk about, but just try to limit yourself to 750 words. And do keep in mind, there's a lot of things in that article we're not directly dealing with, some references to other things she refers to, but just try to focus on what's in the question and the main ideas that come out in terms of psychological oppression. And then, so in particular, how she connects this to this idea of a double bind, right? How she says being in the issue of psychological oppression means you're in this kind of double bind. Specifically, where she says, on the one hand, there is this idea, there can be a general idea or recognition of equality among all human beings, and one can identify with that, and so on. Even though at the same time, on the other hand, there can be a kind of hierarchical binary of gender roles or normative expectations pertaining to gender, wherein the activities and so on that have a lot to do with or are associated with what it really means to be a human being seem to be skewed to the masculine side as opposed to the feminine. And that then one can get caught up in this confusing situation, basically, where, one's identity is torn and pulled in two different directions in a way that doesn't seem to be the case for men, right? You're torn between seeing yourself as a human being, but then also trying to see oneself as a woman. These don't fit so easily together. It seems like you can't actually have it both ways. And this, is kind of a psychologically very difficult situation to be in. So that's kind of what you want to be thinking about, just what she means by that. And I wanted you to try to make a connection when she talks about the idea of oppression being kind of mystified. I mean, she just means, mysterious, hard to understand, difficult to see. I mean, we've kind of talked some about that, and that's, that may well be true. But here, when we focus on psychological oppression, it can become clearer as to why that is. To the extent that oppression is internalized and takes on a psychological form like this, stands to reason to believe that would be harder to see. It becomes kind of hidden. And it seems to, that seems to almost reinforce itself when what she describes as how individual women can start blaming themselves in some way, or believing that the problem lies within themselves as opposed to where it really lies, which is out in society that is based on structures of sexist oppression. So that can certainly, kind of work together in that way. So having in mind the idea, the relevance of the notion of oppression, partly we can see that maybe thinking about it in psychological terms as well could be very useful. Maybe, maybe not, but it certainly could help us to see how it could be that even in societies such as ours, where the more overt, more explicit, more brazen forms of sexist oppression have perhaps been addressed, such that, the gender gap has in many ways been narrowed. But if there still are problems, it could be they more so, say, than in other places, take this more internalized form, a psychological form, and so it could be useful in terms of supporting a claim that oppression remains quite a significant problem. It's just that its form has sort of gone beneath the surface. So you can think about it like an iceberg, right? The idea with an iceberg, of course, is supposed to be that the visible part, the more obvious part of the iceberg, is really just a small part of it, that the largest part lies below the surface of the water, right? Meaning it's hidden from view. So it could be that something like this also goes on with the notion of psychological oppression in societies such as our own. So hopefully that's helpful. But yes, just focus on Barkey, focus on what she means by making that connection between psychological oppression and that double bind. You might find, by the way, remember what Fry said about a double bind, kind of useful. It's kind of a no-win situation. That's the situation one is in. And then if you can, just try to relate it to that notion of mystification and what that might mean. But again, any questions, of course, just get in touch with me.